Okay, and we'll see if we have any attendees come in.
Good. Okay. So I'd like to call the planning board meeting of March 5th to order at 5:02, consistent with the mayor or the governor's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law and banning gatherings of more than 10 people. This meeting will be conducted by remote participation to the greatest extent possible. The public may not physically attend this meeting, but every effort will be made to allow the public to view and listen to the meeting in real time. In the event that that live transmission proves unworkable for any reason, an audio and/or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of the meeting will be made available on the city's website as soon as possible. So I believe all members have been identified correctly as their sign-in. We have a single consent agenda item, which is an approval not required application submitted by Ronald J. and Jane L. Gillis for division of land at 373 Concord Street, Assessors Map 239, lots 29 and 30. Well, here's some more people. Do we have any representation for this A&R?
I'm not sure that we do, but let me just call up the plan.
And just for the record, Mayor Romeo Taken has joined us as a panelist. Welcome, Mayor.
Thank you very much.
Application and plan. So this is a fairly straightforward application. These are two lots on Concord Street owned by separate entities. And the intention is to erase this lot line here. This is actually currently in a separate lot. And the owner of 173 would like to purchase this land from the owner of, sorry, I have to crane my head, 367 Concord Street. There's no change to the frontage or access of the two lots, and they will continue to comply with the district. I believe this is a R40 district with 1 acre zoning essentially. And again, this will put this, was already conforming in terms of area, and this would only add to that to come up with a balance of about 53,000 square feet for 373, and then obviously much larger acreage of about 4.6 acres for 367 Concord Street.
Thank you, Greg. Any comments from board members? Mr. Rosen.
Just a question about the plan. So there's no, given the zoning out there, there's no intent to further subdivide 373? It's just to add land?
Yeah, not associated with this application. It's not to my knowledge that really the intent and the applicant is the owner of 373 that would like the additional land. I believe there may even be an existing shed on that property. So I think they've come to an agreement, the two property owners, to increase the size of this lot, which would now include some area that I think he may have been using. I can't confirm that. But again, the only intention of this application is to annex land to 373 at the expense of 367.
Okay, do you happen to know if the house at 373 predates the zoning ordinance?
I don't know that. I don't know that.
Okay.
Because in the application, I think what David's getting at, the application shows an R80.
It shows an R80.
Yeah,
Okay.
second page.
Let me just verify the zoning real quickly.
You can't really see it on the.
Too many windows, too many windows.
So if it's R80.
Yeah, I think it still won't be an issue. It would only be adding land. So if that lot doesn't comply With area, it will only make it more conforming by adding another 10,000 square feet to it. But let me just verify. Whoops, let me verify that.
But in the R80 zone, is that 80,000 square foot minimum?
It is.
Yeah, okay, so then I don't have any concerns then.
Well,
So 373 was probably pre-existing non-conforming
right.
priority district.
Let me just,
Okay,
while we have it here. Where's the corner? Yep, you're right. So sorry, I misspoke. It is R80. But again, this will remain having quite more than that at 4.6 acres. And this will become around 50,000. So it'll still be short on area.
okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
I'll move to approve the application.
I just had a question.
Okay, Beverly?
Howard, that doesn't preclude further subdivision of the bigger lot, should it be
It does not.
compliant, but it would have to be a separate action, as long as
Correct.
both resulting lots were 80,000 square feet. I just want to point that out.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
So Hank, you want to take a whack at a motion?
I move to approve that the application.
Okay. We have a motion and a second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Sean. All in favor?
Roll call vote. Member Noonan,
Yes.
Member McCarl,
Yes,
Member Bookin,
Yeah,
Member Cook,
Yes.
Member Henry,
Yes.
Member Remsen,
yes,
and Member Rosen.
Yes,
Okay.
So next, under other business on our short agenda this evening, a review and discussion of housing choice changes to Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, the Zoning Act.
Okay, so I think I made mention and also provided some resources in advance of the last meeting of the board that associated with the economic bond bill. There were also a number of changes to Chapter 40A, and there were a couple of synopsises. I almost wanted to say synopsis. Get some Latin in there.
synopses.
Synopses, exactly. Provided, and more recently, there was a webinar hosted by the Massachusetts Municipal Association that had a couple of key folks from the state side to provide an overview and some guidance. And I have that presentation. I can walk through a couple of slides if you would like. Otherwise, I could also provide the presentation, and there's also a link to a recording of the presentation. But I just wanted to highlight maybe a couple of the items that we discussed last time in terms of how it will affect permitting, as well as the zoning amendment process in Gloucester as it relates to housing. So I'll just share this presentation I won't go through the entirety of it. There were a couple of slides that I thought were kind of helpful to go through. So again, you know, that legislation actually did in fact modify Chapter 40A. And in particular, so this summary just talks about, there was a lot of discussion about trying to move zoning amendments forward that will increase production. In the beginning of the presentation, you can see the trending of both housing supply and production over decades, and how there's been such a significant decline, which is part of the reason for the demand. And also, there was a pretty interesting statistic showing, I think in about 1985, Massachusetts had a median sales price that was very aligned with the national average. And we are currently at the top right up there with California. And I'm trying to remember the other state. So, I mean, that's the real challenge. And over such a short period of time, we've had just such an escalation in sales prices that, you know, I'm sure everybody takes a look at their taxes, and we haven't seen quite the same increase in incomes. So there's the disparity. So, you know, the real push as part of the Housing Choice program was to try to see, you know, how we could facilitate housing not only locally, but more on a regional basis, which, you know, the observation is a lot of it has to do with how a community zones. And if there's a way to, you know, lower that burden of action from a 2/3 majority to a simple majority, that may stimulate some increase in housing and also increase in housing form that may have been challenged in the past. So one of the real high notes of the presentation was currently there is absolutely nothing that a community has to do. These are all things that are either enabling for the community if they pursue certain types of zoning amendments that will only require a simple majority, or as they permit certain types of multifamily housing or changes in dimensions, again, it would lower that burden. So that is on the books. But it's also interesting that it really depends on what you are trying to propose. So it's not a wholesale of any housing zoning amendment only requires a simple majority. It really depends on what type, which many of which are specified in the actual presentation. So here's an example that's a good summary. Zoning that allows for certain kinds of housing as of right, including multifamily and mixed use development in an eligible location. And there's a definition of that. Accessory dwelling units and open space residential development. And I will also add that the accessory dwelling units is also based on whether you comply with a definition that's been provided for accessory dwelling units. So there's kind of a situation where, as we discuss the proposed ADU ordinance later on, at first glance you would say, oh, okay, this is going to be one of those situations where the required vote for passage would only be a simple majority or 5 of 9 of the city council, because of some of those provisions in there that also allow for that ADU to potentially be larger than what's proposed in the state definition. It does fall back to a supermajority of the city council. So that's, I think, some of the things that are very germane to look at the current draft as it moves forward or not from initiation from the planning board. Zoning that allows certain types of housing development by special permit. Again, there's a lot of focus on this eligible location. And again, if that housing proposal is in an eligible location, again, the burden would be reduced from a supermajority or sorry, a 2/3 majority to a simple majority. Accessory dwelling units that are not attached to a primary home. Again, there's a definition that we have to look at closely. Again, I think it's also a matter of what the intention is of collectively of the board in terms of how you want the ordinance to perform and what it will allow. So I'm a little bit less concerned about which kind of box it's put in terms of the required vote, but it is a consideration, you know, in terms of just how the process would be followed through on. Allowing for an increase in density through a special permit process. Again, one that may or may not be applicable currently. And then anything that relates to a reduction of parking requirements for residential or mixed use developments. And then finally, zoning that allows for changes in dimensional standards that allow for additional units. So if that those changes propose increased height, reduction in lot area requirements, setbacks, open space requirements, or parking. Again, those would fall to a simple majority at this point. Amendments to adopt smart growth, 40R district, starter home district, or natural resource protection zoning, which has a little bit of a new definition in the proposed amendments, or I'm sorry, the state amendments to 40A, or transfer of development rights. So there were some examples that were run through. They do realize that this is all new, so there is support at the state level to run by scenarios to ensure that prior to the initiation of a zoning process, you can say, I think it's a little bit more of a concern potentially for a town that enacts zoning or bylaw amendments through town meeting. Here we have, the ability to kind of prep things before they go forward a little bit more nimbly, perhaps. But they are recognizing that this is, again, the first time that this state legislation has been changed in decades. And so there's definitely some interpretation that still has to occur. But again, a scenario here where there's a proposal for an ADU up to 800 square feet as of right, that would qualify, again, because it meets the statutory criteria of being no larger than half the size of the main home or 900 square feet. So those are the types of things that we can look at, how we defined an ADU and whether or not we want to modify in any way. And then the second example of a zoning proposal that would allow a 1,200 square foot ADU as of right would not qualify for the simple majority vote. So I think there's a little bit of that. It's a give and take in terms of kind of a conception of an ADU in the development of the state legislation, saying yes, if it complies with this, we agree, you can move forward with the lower threshold vote. But if it doesn't or expands beyond this definition, it would still require the process that you currently follow through on with a 2/3. And again, so there's just other examples, and that's something that can be reviewed, but it's pretty clear that if something as drafted and considered in a proposal doesn't meet up with some of these criteria in the new legislation, we will just carry course with how we typically amend our zoning ordinance in Gloucester. Again, there was a lot of there was also a question and answer period on this call that allowed people to provide some scenarios. And again, if you have a fairly broad ordinance that's doing a lot of things, it's possible that if it were broken into several different proposals, again, one might require a simple, one might require a 2/3, and so on. And I think, trying to think if there's anything else in specifically. I think that's the bulk. And again, I can provide the link to the presentation if you'd want to view it. I think there'll be more opportunities and more presentations coming forward. One of the other things in particular, there's a reference to Chapter 161A, which defines MBTA communities, which Gloucester happens to be one of. And there are provisions in the new legislation that relate to enacting zoning within a half mile of a transit stop. Again, that is tied to some other funding opportunities that the city may pursue. So that's something we have to pay attention to and focus on. It's kind of germane also to the discussions that we've been having around the potential for TOD around the downtown train station. But again, the guidance very clear and upfront was there's nothing that you have to do right now. Everybody is in compliance currently. They are still working through some of the definitions of eligible location and when things might have to be enacted before it would affect a community's ability to apply for certain other grant programs. So there's a real attempt here in some ways, again, providing tools to municipalities through this legislation, but at the same time, kind of tying economic incentives to it as well. If you're a small town that doesn't typically utilize state funding for a variety of things, infrastructure or otherwise, and you're happy with your zoning, you don't have to do a thing. But to the extent that you're been working on housing production plans, its implementation, and also utilize those funding sources, then it's a real kind of hand in hand kind of outline for how to help you move those initiatives forward. So I can stop there and answer any questions. And I'll put that presentation in the Google Drive and also email you a link to the presentation. This was just, I want to say it was yesterday, but it may have been Tuesday because I can't remember.
Okay. Any questions for Greg on that? Okay. Any other on the 40A stuff, Greg?
I think so. That I would leave that there for now. The only other topic that has come up that I think it may be something that the board might wish to discuss at a future date is one of the definitional changes was to the provision for cluster zoning.
Mhm.
There's been a wholesale replacement of references to cluster to open space residential development. And as you know, we have 2 ordinances on the books that are designed to either preserve open space or provide for a compact development form, both the cluster and the OSRD. So that was kind of a need for some clarification because typically we enact what we're allowed to by the State Zoning Act. The guidance was there's nothing that you have to do, but that question of if one of those ordinances is superior to the other, or kind of doing a compare and contrast as to how we want to see them operate. That was kind of just an open question for discussion. Perhaps we've seen some utilization of the cluster, as you know, and fairly limited utilization of the OSRD, and that's seems to be the direction the state is kind of pushing in terms of an OSRD as of right, rather than potentially a cluster by special permit.
Isn't it peculiar that we've seen both on the same parcel?
Again, so there's kind of the question of you almost have the thinking of, okay, well, which one is really, what's the message? You have a
Right.
conventional approach, and then you have these 2 other approaches that have some distinction associated with them in how they can work for the long term in terms of ownership and that type of we've seen that the 1 lot cluster, the potential for a lotted cluster, whereas typically an OSRD would be a lotted plan, a form of a subdivision. So again, that's just kind of a question and direction in terms of homeowners association or condominium association, and also whether there's advantage or disadvantage to the 2 of them.
I think we could do a much better job replacing both those ordinances with something that works better than the OSRD, and that once we decide which direction we're actually coming at it from, which is either density or open space or both. But it's ridiculous to have 2 of them on the books. And it would be nice to be in alignment with the state and not be, caught with our proverbial pants down later when the cluster doesn't work or something.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you, Greg, for that. Next, under other business this evening, review and discussion of final draft accessory dwelling unit ordinance.
So as we talked about the cadence, I also can report. So I appeared at Planning and Development last evening on the draft amendments to Section 511 inclusionary housing requirements. They voted 3 in favor to recommend to the city council the adoption of the revised draft as of the planning board's meeting on February 18th, which clarified some of the lettering and numbering that kind of got distorted over the numerous drafts over the last many months. And also with the insertion of a cross-reference to ALR that's already exists as an ordinance in the zoning ordinance. So they have recommended that draft for public hearing, which will be conducted next Tuesday, March 9th, at their meeting that begins at 6:30. So I essentially provided a similar presentation to the one that I provided on the 18th with one amendment. Thank you, David Rosen, for the clarification of what we've always have been using in a lot of this discussion is terminology that is provided for by HUD in terms of the statistics that are used, and also their terminology for the rents that are generated or calculated for those moderate income households are always termed fair market rents, when actually they are the affordable rents. So I added that parenthetically. David, thank you for that, to clarify for folks that those rents that are provided are again based on those income levels and what those maximum rents could be. So we'll do the show again next week. We did have some input from the public at the discretion of the chair. There was some input from the public, which include some sentiments about the removal of an option for off-site. And I think we had a fair amount of discussion, both Housing Production Plan Working Group, Planning Board, and subcommittee about, the intention is inclusion. And so, the options are limited to the type of affordability that you want to provide, 80 or 60% AMI households, and then also the in lieu option for the smaller projects. But that was something that was removed. And again, I think, exactly to the point, if you're talking about inclusion, then we may not necessarily think that the idea is to provide some housing somewhere else in the community. So that was one, just question or concern raised by a member of the public. And then also, just a little bit of concern about the threshold and also the level of or the fee required for the in lieu payment, and how that will work, how that will work itself out in terms of development proposals and how it will impact it. So I think the board has had a lot of discussion about that. And for a project, as we discussed, the closer the rent or sale might be to the market of that project, all the more reason it should be included in the project. And in a project where, perhaps the sales prices are much higher than the affordable sales or rents, all the more reason why that in lieu payment should be something, equating to what it costs to develop an affordable unit. So thus far it's been recommended, and we'll see what happens at the public hearing next Tuesday. So next in the queue was the discussion of the ADU ordinance and whether or not that's ready to initiate. It's too late at this point to get it on the city council agenda for referral at its next meeting, but it certainly could be in time for their second meeting in March. So if we want to pull that up and kind of have a refresher on that, and maybe look at it through the lens of the new definitions at the state level, or just in general familiarize yourself with it again Again, we can take this up at this evening if we have the time on the agenda. This is the only other agenda item. Or if folks want to take some time to look and think about, if for any reason, if you think there's a need to think about how to implement this best in light of the changes at the state level.
Jane?
I think we should keep moving forward. There's only one significant change, I think, if I read it, if maybe I'm not up to speed on all of 40A, obviously, but your stuff that I read, which is the state definition of accessory dwelling unit is 50% of the primary unit, or 900 square feet. And we have 30% and 1,000 square feet. So we could become more in alignment with the state there, but is there any other place where we would, where we're significantly out of alignment with the state?
I don't think so. And, so those are, again, just the criteria piece, and then how it would relate to how you would proceed through the amendment process. So, they interestingly kind of broke it up into two separate potential ordinances or approaches of a by right versus a special permitted. And we actually have the instance where we're saying if you meet certain setbacks, it may be as of right. And if you don't, it's a special permit. And, and otherwise set that criteria of 30%. And you pointed it out. Let me just pull it up.
I thought we just said that about the height.
So we said, let me roll down. So accessory dwelling unit to be a maximum of 30% of the habitable floor space and 1,000 square feet. So it's kind of interesting. We're smaller, but then have a cap that's a little bit higher, right? In terms of the 1,000 square feet. And that is allowed as of right. And then we also have detached, provided they're meeting those setbacks, correct? And then a special permit for anything that doesn't.
Where does it say that?
So we have this,
Oh, I
if
see.
you don't
Yeah.
meet the provisions, then it requires a special
Right.
permit. And otherwise, the intention was if it's internal and meets that definition, if it's external and meets that definition, that it would be allowed.
So the special permit just kind of captures, in my opinion, or, I envision it capturing the garage on Eastern Point that's much bigger than what, than 1,000 square feet, but you still want to turn it into a rental unit, so you go for a special permit. So is that, yeah, so it just captures the
Correct.
outliers.
So it's interesting. So the state is saying, as of right, with those definitions, would only require the simple majority, and then a special permit for a detached, meeting certain criteria would also be allowed. So we've kind of got the criteria a little bit different for an internal, and then we also have the as of right aspect for a detached. So again, path-wise, this will follow the path that it would otherwise always have required. So again, there's no requirement to change your definition unless that was something important in the process, where if we were off by a little bit and you thought that it would be an advantage to have a simple majority vote because of this tiny little tweak, so be it. But otherwise, I don't think there's anything, that there's no change if it's pursued the way it's currently drafted.
So just taking the temperature of the city council, do you think this would be controversial, Greg?
I think we're, and as we've been discussing these different proposals, I think there's going to be a a lot of public input on this. I do. I think, as I've, kind of vicariously, I'm right there with the building department. I see the applications coming before the zoning board. And whenever there's a modification of an accessory structure and it requires a public hearing, a lot of the concern is, whether or not that structure is going to be used as a dwelling unit. So, it's a real concern. It's, with some of the requirements to try to now put in place to address and mitigate for, what that new use on a property might mean. Whether that's going to be satisfactory to people, I don't know. I think for some people, probably not. So it's hard to say without having the public hearing on the inclusionary next week, but there's support from three of the members, and actually other members were also present. They're obviously not deliberating, but ask questions, and we're pleased with the presentation. It'll be in a public hearing next week. So again, as you kind of move through the different types of proposals, if I had a crystal ball, I would say, there's going to be support, and there's also going to be, some negative concerns, or I should say concerns with enacting it. So I don't know how that will translate after the public process. Again, with the goal of trying to, introduce housing that will be, regulated as a rental unit, that will be restricted to, not being allowed to be rented for less than 30 days and those types of things, which will also become an enforcement issue if it is enacted. There's a push and pull out there in terms of whether people are interested in having these introduced into their neighborhoods. So I think the idea of, the owner occupied home and a small rental unit that is long-term and really provides for somebody in the community, that ideal scenario, I think everybody, not everybody, but many people could be supportive of. And the concerns of, it becoming a short-term rental, not really, providing, housing stock per se, or year-round housing stock will be the concerns. And also, and if it isn't monitored and enforced in such a way to ensure that it's a longer term rental unit, the impact of the short term on the immediate abutters in the neighborhood. A lot of people like to come here in the summer.
Well, I think, my opinion is that we addressed all those issues, right? And so the thing is that we approve, at least my opinion is that it's low hanging fruit. It allows for, it legitimizes, things that may not be, on the radar, right? I mean, and chances are it's not going to be a $2,000 apartment. It's going to be a $800 apartment, and it offers enforcement, right? I mean, so, and we talked about shielding and all the other issues. So, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's important to note is if there are such units out there, and I think there's everybody kind of nods their head and probably knows someplace where, yeah, I think that's a unit. From the perspective of providing safe housing as well is probably one of the ones that's even overarching. If there is going to be a unit that's rented, it should be safe. And
Right.
So, having a process whereby somebody can declare, this is going to be a rental unit, it has an inspection associated with it. And that's where there already is some monitoring and inspection associated with that. It'll be, the challenge really will be is if there's a complaint and trying to verify, is somebody really there, for a longer duration? Is this being rented on a daily or weekly basis, that type of thing. Those I can see are, if it is enacted, that will be those will be the challenges.
Any other comments about moving forward versus thinking about the ADU?
Beverly has her hand up.
Who
Okay, I have
does?
a couple of questions. So the state is saying 50% of a house or 900 square feet is assume whichever is lesser Yes? or
Let me-
both, either.
Let me see if I can get back to that. Or was that? Let's see. So qualifies because zoning meets statutory no larger than half the size of the main home or 900 square feet.
So either or.
It's a good question.
Okay. Let me say this. Well, 50% of a 3,000 square foot house is 1,500 square feet. That's a big difference between that and 9 or 1,000.
Yep.
That's a lot. You know, an ADU, an 800 square foot ADU is easily a 2-bedroom unit. Can easily be 2-bedroom unit.
Mhm.
1,000, you know, is probably a 2-bedroom unit. 1,500 is a 3-bedroom unit. So we are more restrictive by saying the lesser of the two.
Yep.
And so that's kind of a question. And the second question I have is allowed by right, and it's still, the city council still has to vote on it, even though it's allowed by right?
No, that's for the enactment.
Gotcha. Okay, so in other words, allowed by right. So we could be more restrictive, correct?
Yeah. So, you know, in the respect of what you propose for zoning, you still have all the local control to decide whether something is allowed as of right or by a special permit and the parameters associated with the use. They're just saying that if you kind of, in some of these instances with these particular types of amendments, if they either satisfy a criteria or do one of the following things, then the enactment vote will only require a simple majority.
Okay,
So you have the ability to have whatever standard, whatever threshold you prefer, and the consequence is it's just you follow the regular process of a 2/3 majority to enact.
okay. So we're more restrictive. I think the restriction's reasonable. It's an accessory dwelling unit. 50% of the size of the building is, you know, that's a big accessory. I mean, if it's not the lesser of the two, because otherwise, if we're the lesser of the two, then the state is saying 900 square feet, but they aren't. And so we not only is 30% lower than 50%, 1,000 is slightly higher than 900, but it's the lesser of the two. So I don't see a need to change it unless we change it to 900 square feet, but.
No,
we'll
and
work this
also
through.
anything bigger can just fall into the special permit basket. So
Sure.
that's,
Sure. I think we should probably keep it.
I think the other thing that is important to note, you know, as in all the consideration of the accessory dwelling unit, the other thing that is probably, you know, kind of, again, you try to peel back the onion and figure out how these things came to be. A lot of these communities probably still remain having single family districts. We have 2-family on the books as well. So I think that's why, you know, this is very specific in terms of defining something a little bit, you know, more discrete or, you know, the detached, because we have those other options available already. So this may be an instance where, you know, it's also trying to make an appeal to some of those communities that don't have any multifamily zoning, don't have anything other than single family district, and saying, if you want to start helping, you know, this might be an option, and providing, you know, again, a way to try to move that forward in a town, for instance, that is just primarily residentially zoned and perhaps large lot zoned, and only for single family.
Okay, so, and I would agree. So I think we're more restrictive in the overall. And because we've got a duplex is essentially 2 units of similar size. And so it seems to me that by having the restriction we have, we're saying an ADU is a different kind second unit. And I think that the way we've captured it is reasonable. The second question I had is based on enforcement. And I think you pretty much rely on neighbors to enforce, in the sense as neighbors can tell when they see strangers going in and out and they see strange cars on the site. You know, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that maybe it's being used by the day or the week. You can also find if it has a listing, you know, on Airbnb or a listing on some of the other. And you can also go to the, as a matter of enforcement, go to the property owner and ask them to show you the lease. So my sense is there is a way to enforce it, but it relies on the neighbors to say, hey, you know, that ADU is not a motel room. It is a rental unit. And a rental unit by definition is rented for 30 days or more. So I don't think enforcement should be too much of a problem if it bothers neighbors. I don't know how other people think about that.
I point out that I don't think there's an issue of properly observing a violation. I think there's a difference between a violation and enforcement. You know, in terms of how somebody will basically prevent that from occurring. You know, it's something that's falling under zoning, which falls to the building inspector's office, inspectional services office, which
it would be the building inspector.
you know, which has a staff of 4. And, you know, it's just a matter of, you know, when this potential type of thing occurs, if it's occurring on weekends, you know, it's just, so that's just, you know, it's a challenge now already, you know, as somebody observes something that doesn't seem like it complies with it, it sometimes can be, you know, a bit of a process to try to get the results of enforcement, because it's documentation, letter writing, violation, you know, that type of thing. And so
yeah, I understand.
it's
that,
usually
but,
not something that's swiftly resolved. So that's,
No.
you know, that's just going to be a concern that's going to be out there.
It is, but I mean, motivated neighbors will do the research. Okay, so the other thing I just want to ask, because Sean very kindly sent us the Oregon ADU rules for a bunch of jurisdictions in the Portland metropolitan area. And I was noted in my comments to all of you that I was surprised that new ADUs are charged system development charges for sewer, water, parks, and so on in Oregon. And I didn't know that because they're charged at the time of building permit, not at the time they're approved by planning permit. So, you know, being a planner, I just never even thought about it. And these system development charges in Oregon range from about $6,000 to $25,000 a unit, and $25,000 a unit is kind of a whopper for, you know, for essentially a small apartment. And so I'm wondering, does a new unit that goes in and has a building, you know, obviously has a building permit, does it get charged residential SDU system development charges, SDCs?
So that would be, it's a good question, because for a 2-family, they typically have a separate water and sewer connection, and would be charged as a unit. And this is an accessory use. The current in-law apartment, I don't believe, has a separate charge associated with it. It's obviously more complicated if it's not on public sewer, because there may, you know, that an on-site system is regulated by bedroom count. So there may be limitations whether someone could even pursue it. But if they could, I believe as an accessory, they can tie into their own system. But in those instances, for instance, with a standalone ADU, and whether or not there's also in the ordinance the allowance for a compensatory sewerage fee. And how that will be addressed, I can certainly clarify that with Public Works and how they would deal with that.
I think it's important, you know,
Yep.
I never thought about it, but why, you see, if it's a mother-in-law apartment, then you presumably, right now, I don't think it's enforceable, but as a mother-in-law apartment, it's a relative. So if you have a single bill, you know, you have an extra bedroom and you have more sewerage and you have more water usage, that can be figured out internally, right? But when you have a renter, you know, they should be assessed for electricity and sewer and water, unless the rent includes utilities, but often it's rent plus utilities. And so it seems to me it's not unreasonable to have a for the city, and we don't have to do it because it's not in this planning ordinance, it's in the building permit side, should make a decision whether or not it's going to charge those kinds of system development charges.
Mhm.
And it's to the city's advantage because that's more revenue coming in to support the basic services. You use it, you should pay for your impact for sewer and water. Maybe not parks, but certainly sewer and water.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that it will be, it'll be metered, obviously. The question is whether or not there's essentially that fee for tying in that additional accessory unit.
It'll be interesting for that to be explored, and that's, as I say, a building issue, but it'd be important to the city to be able to have those fees come in and support the infrastructure budget.
David? You're muted.
You're still muted.
Oh, still
How about that? We're
better.
good now?
Gotcha.
Okay. To that point that Beverly brought up, if you have an ADU, I would assume that the city would then assess that as a separate unit. And wouldn't that then be reflected in the taxes, the overall taxes for the property?
So I think the way that it's typically approached is the valuation by the assessors is always dependent upon comp sales. So the question would be whether or not a lot with an ADU has greater value than one that doesn't. There are obviously other factors that go into their analysis, location, water view, all sorts of different things. But I think that's something that would play out as they would see whether or not, they would certainly see the construction value potentially. So that affects assessed value as well.
Mm-hmm.
But longer term, it'll be a matter of, whether a comparable single family or a single family with accessory has greater value.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, David. Yes, Sean, still muted.
I was just going back to the state requirement, 50% or 900 feet. It would seem that there would have to be an or less implied in there, even if it's not included in their little bullet point item that they put out already, because otherwise you would have to go with the assumption that in communities where 4,000 square foot, 5,000 square foot homes are common, that they're going to do a by right 2,000 or 2,500 foot ADU. And if they're doing that, it wouldn't seem like they'd throw 900 feet in. So assuming that 50% or 900 square feet or less is the situation, I think it would make sense for us to make that change in our ordinance so that it would be in keeping with as much as possible with the new state ordinance. It just doesn't seem sensical to me that the state would do a by right 2,500 square foot ADU to a 5,000 square foot McMansion someplace, that it has to be an either or less situation, just as ours is written.
I'm just trying to see if I can actually find the language in the statute. Talk amongst yourselves. It's only 101 pages.
Right. The other issue that Beverly brought up about the charges, I think in some of those communities, at least, they use the charges and the potential to waive those charges to restrict the ADUs to long-term rental use as opposed to short-term. There was an incentive. They established the fees and were waiving the fees if the owner adhered to a barring short-term rentals.
I saw that one or two times when that was the jurisdiction waiver, but by and large not. And because you can have the city of Portland just simply has on the planning books that ADUs must be used for long-term rentals, which are defined in the zoning code for 30 days or more. And so I think the 1 or 2 jurisdictions was the unusual one. The intent is not to create Airbnbs. The intent is to create rental units.
Right.
But as far as the 900, going back, I would be happy to go to the 800 if you all agree that I'm sorry, from 1,000 to 900, because we're really talking about housing for small households, 1 and 2 person households, maybe 2 persons and a child at the most, or maybe a mother and, a single parent and a child. And 900 square feet is, as I say, easily a 2-bedroom unit, and that suits that household type. So I think going from 1,000 to 900 is not a big, it's just not a leap, is not a terrible thing. I think it's a reasonable thing to do if being consistent with state law is something that the group values. I could go either way.
So just to, so the provision reads, is not larger in floor area than half the floor area of the principal dwelling or 900 square feet, whichever is smaller.
So I think if that's the case, then giving up that 100 square feet in our current draft, taking that to 900 and then bumping it to 50% on the other, because it's still whichever is less. So
Yep.
Means maximum 900 square feet regardless. And it opens up the possibility for someone who has a 1,500 square foot home to do a 750 square foot ADU as opposed to 500 square foot, which is more usable.
I think that's fine with me. Greg, what is the section of, is 40A or 40R that you were just reading?
I was reading from 40A, and it's section 16 of the amendments. So there's that document that I provided
Okay.
in the last, and it actually goes by lines. It's line 1253 that has the definition of accessory dwelling unit in it.
Okay, thanks. I agree with you, Sean, now. Sorry, Greg.
And it also doesn't preclude the ability also to put additional restrictions and also limits on or prohibition of short-term rental. So there's, I believe we state that, and that's something that's also accepted in the state definition as well.
So if we change that, does that mean we would only need a simple majority of the city council?
No, because again, if we were forwarding an ordinance that was just for an interior ADU, meeting those criteria, then yes. But because we also have in the same ordinance, the consideration of a detached ADU also by right, if we had put it in such that it was meeting those criteria for internal and a special permit for an external, then it would, and maybe, I mean, we'll see how things shake out,
Yeah.
but.
So that could be plan B if, right? I mean, you can separate them and pass what you can pass and then fix what you couldn't pass.
Could.
Any other discussion? Beverly?
I don't know our planning commission. I'm sorry, our city council well enough to know whether it would take a 2/3, whether we can get a 2/3. But I believe and the mayor can probably confirm this, that our city council is in favor of increasing building stock in Gloucester to serve I believe, up to 40% of our population who is housing insecure. And so it seems to me that even with the 2/3 majority, it would probably pass, because that's what the intent of this particular chapter in
think
the zoning code is intended. But
We
someone
always
can
swing.
disagree.
We always swing for unanimous.
Okay, but my
That
sense
would
is
be
it's
the
doable.
idea. Yeah.
It's doable, and we don't have to, I don't think we have to do a pretzel with splitting them. I'm pretty sure we would get the 2/3 because it's the right thing to do in terms of meeting our short-term goal. And it's essentially a cheap date in the sense that these things generally are pretty hidden. They're not, I think that they're there without the impact of even a duplex, for example. So my sense is that we would find favor at the city.
Fingers crossed for no drama, Beverly. That's the plan.
So do we want to push this out the front door and see what happens?
Yes.
We need a motion, Greg, to,
Yes.
Do we-
I-
Are we doing it with the change to accommodate the state language or leaving it as is?
Yes, so I will amend the draft. Jane also gave me a couple little edits today. But I will change section 524.5 standards for interior ADUs, B1, so that the draft will read, the accessory dwelling unit shall be a maximum of 50% of the habitable floor area of a single family dwelling, or 900 square feet, whichever is less. And then otherwise, the draft as presented in the drive with a cross-reference that Jane has provided.
And
And
it'd be, you'd have to change it 5.24.5A also.
5.24A.
5.24.5A for a detached ADU, the same specs there, 900 square feet or 50%.
So, I mean, that's also a question. So they are, there's no specification. I think that was all pertaining to, is that all pertaining to interior?
Yes. The first one was
Yeah.
all interior.
For the state definition you're talking about?
So the state definition, interestingly, is a self-contained housing unit. Oh, it does say on the same lot as the principal dwelling unit, subject to dimensional requirements. So, yeah, it does seem like they're placing that dimensional requirement also on a detached. So if that's something you want to be consistent on, then we would also change the dimensional requirements for detached. Being
Seems
a
like it makes
maximum
sense.
of 900 square feet or 50% of the total habitable space of the principal dwelling, whichever is less.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
thank you, Sean.
Welcome.
Do we need a formal resolution here, or is everything just,
I think we do.
So I would put a new date on this draft reflective of March 4th. And 1 second. Bear with me. Wasn't sure where we were going to land. So you would, the motion would take a form of, under the provisions of section 1.11 of the Gloucester zoning ordinance, amendments to the Gloucester zoning ordinance, section 112A, the planning board recommends the adoption of the proposed amendment, inclusionary housing ordinance, section 524, to replace the existing section 524, as well as amending the definition of accessory dwelling unit in section 6 of the zoning ordinance.
Would you like to make
So
that motion,
moved.
Hank?
Or Hank, go ahead.
I'll let Jane make the motion. I'll second it. How's that?
Okay, so moved.
Thank you, Jane.
Second.
Go Go Hank, go.
And we had Hank as a second?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Hank is a second.
Okay, so I will prepare this with a cover memo to be submitted to the city council for their second meeting in March for consideration for referral.
We
And
need a roll call vote, Greg?
a roll call vote. Member Noonan,
Yes.
Member McCarl,
Yes,
Member Bookin,
Yes,
Member Cook,
Yes.
Member Henry,
Yes.
Member Remsen,
Yes.
and Member Rosen.
Yes.
Does
Okay.
the city council meet every week?
The city council meets second and fourth Tuesdays of the month, and standing committees in between. So the next regular meeting of the city council is next Tuesday. So this will be forwarded such that it can be referred for public hearing. Just pulling up a calendar. So they meet on the 9th and the 23rd. So it would be presented at the meeting of the 23rd.
But it would go to P and D the week before, presumably.
No, so it will be referred back to the planning board for public hearing.
Oh,
And
right, right.
after planning board public hearing, then to
Right.
P and D, and then back to
Okay,
city council.
okay.
So
So it'll be
Okay.
the 23rd, Greg? That'll be before the city council?
So 23rd is where it would appear on their agenda to be
Yeah.
referred, and they would refer to the planning board and the planning board and the planning and development standing committee at the same time.
Mhm.
So we would target a public hearing of the planning board for the first meeting in April. And then following that would be whatever the next available P and D meeting would be. So probably likely not to the city council before either the end of April or the beginning of May.
Is there ever any discussion at the city council referral?
So I
Process.
did that full presentation of that was much lengthier, probably about 15 to 20 minutes at the council on the initiation of the inclusionary. So I may do something similar at the meeting of the city council just to, kind of tee it up and kind of outlining its purpose.
Okay,
More often, the ordinance stands on itself, and it's really just a kind of a ministerial act of referring it out. But we'll see how next Tuesday goes, and then we'll return to them. I think it makes sense to keep the dialogue going at every step in the process.
thank you.
Hank, the honor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, I move to adjourn the meeting.
Thank you. Second, please.
Well, second.
Sean, seconds.
Okay, a roll call. Member Noonan,
Yes, please.
Member McCarl,
Yes.
Member Bookin,
yes.
Member Cook,
Yes.
Member Henry,
Yes.
Member Remsen,
Yes.
Member Rosen.
Yes.
Okay, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Good night.
Thank you all.
Hi, everyone.
Night.
Thanks.
Good night.
Thanks, Greg.